So, guys, that doesn't mean you can sleep, okay? You still need to stay awake, pay attention to everything. Might catch something that you missed last time through it. Okay, so one of the most fascinating books of the Bible is the book of Daniel. Now, just so you know, the book of Daniel is not just about the fiery furnace and the lion's den, right? There's more in it than just that. In fact, and that's a good thing, because if it were, then you ladies would have missed half of the whole lessons on Daniel. There's more to it than that. The first 6 chapters open with an account of faith that will inspire both young and old by a young man and his 3 friends who are forcibly taken from their home, and yet they maintain their faith. In the last 6 chapters, they're filled with apocalyptic visions that challenge even the most advanced Bible scholars and students. It's a book that has often been attacked and abused, attacked by those liberals who deny its inspiration. And we'll talk a little bit about the date of Daniel and how they say it had to have been written way after the fact of all the things that are talked about in the book, because there's no way that someone could predict things so far in the future and be exactly right. Well, guess what? Daniel did that. Excuse me. And it's abused by many who have taken its visions completely out of context and made them apply to things that they don't really apply to concerning the second coming of Christ. But if we look at it properly, it can be understood and inspire us to greater faithfulness in our service to God, and strengthen our faith in the inspiration of the Bible. So we want to just review the first 3 chapters real quick this evening, hopefully real quick. So let's start by looking at Daniel, the man and the book. Okay? The man, Daniel, his name means God is my judge. He was a person of deep, abiding faith, or deep and abiding faith. He shows that on a number of occasions throughout the book of Daniel. When he's old, he persisted in God despite threats against his life. In Daniel chapter 6, that's the lion's den account. When he's young, though, as a youth, he resolved not to defile himself. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. And God blessed or rewarded Daniel because of his faith. He rose to great heights in the kingdoms of Babylon and Persia. He served three monarchs or kings. 3. That's incredible when you stop and you think about it, because a lot of times when one king is deposed or dies, the successor has their own ideas for people to advise them. And a lot of times it's not the ones that had advised the previous king. Such is especially the case as was when Babylon fell and the Medes and the Persians rose to power. I mean, Daniel had been serving Nebuchadnezzar and Nabopolassar, 2 Babylonian kings. Why would the Medes and the Persians take him on as an advisor? Well, there had to have been something going on with Daniel and making him special, and that would be, of course, God. He was a contemporary with Jeremiah and Ezekiel. In fact, if you look in the book of Ezekiel, you'll see that Daniel is actually mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel's not mentioned in Daniel's book. Ezekiel was a common refugee. Daniel was serving right up there with the king. That's why Ezekiel maybe knew who Daniel was, but Daniel maybe didn't know exactly who Ezekiel is. Nothing is known about his personal life outside of this book. He is mentioned again in Ezekiel, but he descended from one of Judah's prominent families, perhaps even from royal blood. Daniel 1 verse 3. At an early age, somewhere between 12 and 18, he was taken from Judah and forced to leave his homeland and move to Babylon, where he was trained to serve Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know if he ever married or not. It's never said anywhere if he did or if he didn't. No descendants are ever mentioned, so we just don't know. That's about the man Daniel. We learned a little bit about the book of Daniel. Oh boy. I forgot to put the stuff in this. Okay, well, the author is, of course, the book of Daniel is Daniel. At least that's what most people say. Others say, when we get to talk about the date, they say, no, it was somebody long during the Maccabean period of Israel. Kind of in those 400 years between the Testaments and closer to the New Testament than anything. But there's internal evidence in Daniel chapter 9, verse 2. We read these words. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived that the books of the number of years, etc. So Daniel says it is him that is writing in the first year of Darius, the son of Xerxes, basically. Not the Xerxes from Esther, another Xerxes. All these kings had the same names, and it just kind of, it takes a lot of work to figure out who's who. But, and in chapter 10, verse 2, says, in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. So, again, he says who it is that is writing the book. External evidence. Matthew 25:14, Jesus quotes Daniel. He talks about when you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And that the book of Daniel is where we read about the abomination that causes desolation being prophesied. That, of course, being armies surrounding Jerusalem for its desecration. And he gives Daniel the quote for that. As far as the date of Daniel goes, written somewhere around 535 BC. Daniel may have written towards the end of his life, or it could have been a sort of a diary that he kept throughout his time in Babylon. There's some questions about that. There is no great debate about the date, and it centers around what's known as long-range predictive prophecy. Long-range predictive prophecy. What do you suppose that means? Prophesying way in the future. Yes, way in the future. The subject is, or the reason that they say long-range predictive prophecy argues against Daniel is because they say you can't do that. Some say long-range predictive prophecy is impossible. So instead of dating it in 535 BC, they say, oh, it was at the earliest in the 2nd century BC. However, there is evidence for the early date, and really, when you look at the evidence, the early date is the only date that's even possible. The late dates and so forth aren't possible. There's linguistic evidence. Something you might find interesting is that chapter 1, the prologue of the book of Daniel, telling how they came into the service of Nebuchadnezzar, is written in Hebrew. Then in chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic. And then dealing with the destinies of the nations of the world. Something very important to understand about the Aramaic that chapters 2 through 7 is written in is that by the 2nd century BC, it would have been considered ancient Aramaic. So what does that mean? What is ancient Aramaic versus regular Aramaic? Well, think of it this way. If you were going to write a book in English in 2026, you would use modern English for 2026, right? You'd write it in the language that we speak today. You wouldn't go back and use Shakespearean Elizabethan English. You wouldn't have, a bunch of these, thous, those, and so forth. The old English language and so forth. You might compare the King James Version with more modern versions as far as linguistic style. I mean, you know it's King James just from the style of the language, from the words that are used. And in the same way, this was old Aramaic by the 2nd century from the words that are used. But they still say, well, no, it's still written after the fact. Chapters 8 through 12, dealing with the destiny of the nation of Israel, written in Hebrew again. So there is one more thing we need to discuss about the long-range predictive prophecy. Even if the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC, some of the events that are foretold are still several hundred years in the future. So even if it was written in the 2nd century BC, guess what? There's still long-range predictive prophecy included in it. And so that's just kind of an interesting thing to know if you ever run into somebody who says there's no such thing as long-range predictive prophecy. You can say, well, I don't know about that. So anyway, move to the theme of the book of Daniel. God rules in the kingdoms of men. That's really what Daniel is about. Not just in the Israelite nation or for the Jews, but God is in control of everything. He's in control of the Babylonian kingdom. He's in control of the Medes and the Persians. He's in charge of the, not quite in the book of Daniel, Greek Empire and of the Roman Empire. He's in control. He's in control of everything. The rule of God would be especially made clear with the establishment of God's kingdom. Even in chapter 2, when Daniel has his vision Nebuchadnezzar has his dream of that big statue with the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, and legs and thighs of brass, and feet of iron mixed with clay, and so forth. And then the rock comes and destroys the image and grows to fill the entire earth. That rock is the kingdom of God. And it's going to change everything. And that's kind of exciting to understand that. Then, also, it's seen with the vindication of the cause of his saints, Daniel 7, verse 2. The style, the first part of the book is a historical narrative. That means there's stories of contests, such as in chapter 1, Daniel and his 3 friends win the Diet and Wisdom contest. In chapters 2 and 4, Daniel wins the Interpretation of Dreams contest. In Daniel chapter 5, Daniel wins the Reading on the Handwriting on the Wall contest. And in Daniel chapter, then there's also stories of conflicts. Chapter 3, the conflict that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced. And chapter 6, Daniel's faith conflicts with the laws of the Medes and the Persians. 6 verse 8, and he is thrown into the lion's den. Chapters 7 through 12 is apocalyptic literature. Now, I know that's a scary word to some people. They go, oh, apocalyptic, oh, that's like Revelation, and no one can understand it really. Well, okay, apocalyptic does mean revelation, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to understand. In fact, those who read it properly should understand what it says fairly easily. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a purpose for it. It means to uncover or to reveal. So its purpose is to let us know what's going on, what is going to go on. Apocalyptic literature is written in times of distress, and the purpose of its writing is to give hope, to provide hope to people who are undergoing a severe period of persecution. The book of Revelation is written to comfort Christians during the time of the Roman Empire's persecution of Christians. The book of Daniel is written to comfort the Jews and the Israelites in the time of Babylonian persecution. And again, the purpose of it is that God is in control. It may seem like some world leader is in control of everything that's going on, but God is really in control. And there is nothing in the word apocalypse demands end times. There are some people who say, well, if it's apocalyptic, it has to do with the future, so it has to do with the end of time. No, that's not necessarily true. The word in modern language would be revelation, but that just means things are revealed. And there's extensive use of symbols in apocalyptic literature. Human body, animals, numbers, and colors are used symbolically. Again, some would say, well, that's to keep the people who it wasn't written for from really understanding what was being written. But actually, it's because the subject matter was so foreign to the present reality of readers that symbolism was essential for explanation. In other words, the Jews in their present reality of captivity in Babylon couldn't fathom a day when God would bring forth his kingdom, and it would encompass the entire earth, and it would encompass everyone, and everyone would have the opportunity to be a part of that kingdom. So that gives us a little bit of information about Daniel, the man, and Daniel, the book. Now let's turn our attention to some highlights from chapters 1 through 3. Chapter 1, Daniel's first day on the job. It probably wasn't, but we're going to call it that because it's pretty quick after he gets to Babylon. Jerusalem has been taken by Nebuchadnezzar. There's 3 dates up there, 605, 597, and 586 BC. You'll notice they're in descending order. 605 was the first exile, the first deportation of people from Jerusalem and Judea. That's when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken. 597 is the second deportation. I believe Ezekiel was a part of that deportation. And the third captives, Jerusalem is ultimately defeated in 586, and then actually 11 years later, is when the temple was actually destroyed and Jerusalem was completely destroyed. Now, quick counting lesson for you, and it isn't as effective because it's up there already for you, but the Babylonians counted this way. The year of ascension of a king was year 0. And then starting on the first day of the next year, it was year 1. So let's say that I'm a Babylonian and I become king of Babylon on September 23rd of a year. From September 23rd to December 31st, that's year 0 of my reign. Starting on January 1st, it's year 1 of my reign. The Jews counted a little bit different. For the Jews, the year of ascension was the first year. So if I became a Jewish king on September 23rd, from September 23rd to December 31st was year 1. And then January 1st, year 2 starts. Now, you might say, well, why is that such a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because when you read through here, through the book of Daniel, a lot of times it says in the blank year of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, so that's his third year. So he had been king part of a year, and then the second year, and now we're in his third year. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And then it talks about 3 years of training that they would have to undergo in the latter part of chapter 1. This is important because if the first year counts as 1, or the first part of the year counts as 1, then it makes more sense that it was in their third year that they that they graduated or whatever. If we count as Babylonians would with the first year being 0, then it makes the rest of the book kind of a little iffy as far as how the counting of the years go. Anyway, I'm sure you are all interested in that. So that helps you out a little bit maybe when you read through Daniel and we see year numbers. If it's a Babylonian king, you can pretty much subtract 1 from it or add 1 to it because that first year was year 0. All right. Jerusalem taken, and then we have the cream of the crop taken to Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. And they are given the absolute best. The best education, the best food, the best drink. And that was a problem for Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Should have been a problem for a lot more of the Jews who were taken to Babylon, but apparently it wasn't. And so they have a little contest. 10 days, the end of which they were in better shape than the ones who had eaten the royal food. They were healthier. They looked healthier. They, for 10 days, ate vegetables and water. And they actually apparently gained weight. So, vegetarians that say, we want to lose weight, so we're only going to eat vegetables and drink water. Well, the book of Daniel says that may not lead to what you want to do. Or maybe it will, I don't know. Anyway. But one thing we noticed and noted is that Daniel doesn't, and his 3 friends don't say, well, we're going to just go on a hunger strike. They approach the situation very diplomatically. And when the chief eunuch is afraid that the king will see them looking worse, that's when Daniel says, okay, well, give us a 10-day test. And so he's very diplomatic in the way that he approaches it. And God bless these 4. When they graduate, they're at the top of their class. And when they start serving the king, what the king finds out, what Nebuchadnezzar learns, is that they were 10 times better than all the established wise men of the kingdom. And that's the satraps, governors, etc. All of the people that the king would look to for advice. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were better by a lot, by a landslide, we might say. So then in chapter 2, weird dreams and irrational ultimatums. All right? Nebuchadnezzar has dreams. Now notice it is plural. Chapter 2, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Does that mean he had more than one dream, or he had the same dream more than one time? Probably the same dream more than one time. Bottom line is he was upset by them, and he couldn't sleep because of it. Ever had a dream that made it so you couldn't go back to sleep? Yeah, it's not the most pleasant experience, especially if it's 1:30 in the morning and you can't get back to sleep because of the dream and that woke you up and everything. So Nebuchadnezzar is having some problems. So he decides to test the wise men. He says, I want you to do something for me. Oh, yes, king, no problem. I want you to tell me my dream and its interpretation. Some people think that he said that because he had forgotten the dream. And he was hoping that if he heard it again, he would recognize it. I don't think that that's the case. I think he fully remembered his dream, and he was testing the wise men. Maybe, they had gotten a little bit off. in their advice to him. So bottom line, if they do it, they're going to be rewarded very richly. If they can't do it, they're going to be killed. Okay? So we've got either feast or famine here. Either they're going to be okay or they're going to die. One of the two. And, of course, they can't do it. None of them can. In fact, they correctly tell Nebuchadnezzar, no man can do what you're asking us to do. And Nebuchadnezzar says, now I'm on to you guys. You're just trying to buy time. It ain't going to work. However, Daniel hasn't been called in yet. So we enter Daniel into it. And Daniel is told the predicament that everybody is in, told of the king's decree. And he asks the person that finds him and calls him, it says he was the king's chief executioner. So it would appear that he was going there to find Daniel to separate his head from his shoulders. And Daniel said, no, I hadn't heard about this. Give me a little bit of time. So that chief executioner had liked Daniel before, and so he takes him to Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel says, okay, give me some time, and the God that I serve is able to reveal this to you. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had tried all of his gods, very polytheistic, hadn't worked. But Daniel has this strange new God, whatever. Okay, well, we'll give him a shot. So what is Daniel's what's the first thing that he does? What's his first response when the king sends him away to figure out if his God will reveal the dream? He prayed. Not only did he pray, he got his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to pray as well. And they prayed. And Daniel is given the answer. But when Daniel's given the answer and he goes to Nebuchadnezzar the next day, who gets the credit for telling the dream and the interpretation? Does Daniel say, I did it, it's me? No, he says, the God whom I serve provided the information for you. And of course, Daniel is promoted. He is made a high-ranking official in the Babylonian kingdom, commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. Can you imagine Daniel? He said, I didn't do it. The God I serve in heaven did it. And Nebuchadnezzar says, oh, no worries. He falls on his face, worships Daniel, offers a sacrifice and incense to him, and says, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. And then verse 48 of chapter 2 says, then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Okay, so you got this young whippersnapper from Judah, uneducated, unintelligent Judah, and Nebuchadnezzar now puts him over all the wise men of Babylon. How do you think that's going to sit with some of those older guys who maybe they were hoping to be in charge and they were hoping to be the head honcho? Oh yeah, they're going to be jealous. They're going to be jealous. And Daniel does something else though. He makes sure Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also acknowledged and recognized. Verse 49, Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. So Daniel is at the king's court by the king's side. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go out and handle the king's affairs. So now, these wise guys, that's what we call them, wise guys, have 4 Jews that they have to answer to. Really not interested in that. Which leads us to chapter 3. A gold statue and fireside chat. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar's at it again. He built a 90-foot tall by 9 feet wide statue of gold. Just for your reference, the pinnacle of our auditorium inside is 22 feet high. So it was more than 4 times as high as the auditorium and made of gold. 9 feet wide. That's 3 yards, by the way. That's, from here to here, 1, 2, 3. That's big. And it's made of gold. And it's in his own image. Pretty exciting stuff. He has one simple rule for his statue. When the music plays, everybody worship the image. You don't worship the image, you die. See, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar especially, he didn't need any halfway people in his kingdom. So with the wise men in chapter 2, you either do it or you die. Here, you either do it or you die. Well, the first time everyone does it, except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. By the way, did you know that's not their real names? That's their Babylonian names. Their real names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But for some reason, when they come to Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar renames them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar also renamed Daniel, that's his Hebrew name, his Jewish name. He renames him Belteshazzar. But guess what? We call Daniel by his Hebrew name, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names. Just a little weird. Yes?
Did Nebuchadnezzar momentarily acknowledge Daniel's God?
We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay? They're called into Nebuchadnezzar, called into the principal's office. He says, maybe I wasn't clear about what was expected of you. So I'm going to give you a second chance. Now, those other wise guys who's, I don't know, it doesn't say this, but it may have been their idea to appeal to Nebuchadnezzar's vanity and say, hey, build a statue and make everybody worship it so they could get rid of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Maybe that was their plan. But nowhere in the first mention of these orders is there a second chance mentioned. But Nebuchadnezzar likes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're buddies with his good friend Daniel. Who knows where Daniel is when all this is happening. And they say, okay, well, we'll give you another chance. You got to read verses 16 through 18 of Daniel 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Man, we talk about the faith of Daniel. What about the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They aren't mean about it. They address him as, oh, king, you're the king. We understand that. But we're just not going to do this. You can give us 100 chances, and we're not going to do this. Well, Nebuchadnezzar gets a little bit upset by that. And he heats the furnace to 7 times its normal heat. And our heroes are thrown into the furnace. And when Nebuchadnezzar looks in, course, there's 4 men walking around unharmed, unbound. Only those, he heated the furnace in such a rush and to such a degree that the strong soldiers, some of his mighty soldiers, had thrown them into the furnace and they had died from the heat. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were in, didn't die. And there were 4 people walking around, and he calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out. They're unburned. They don't even smell like fire. They don't even smell like smoke. Incredible. Not a hair of their head was singed. Then Nebuchadnezzar makes a new decree. Anyone saying anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they got to answer to him, to Nebuchadnezzar. I'm real sure that God appreciated that help. Really. Don't you think? I mean, he says anyone who says anything against them is going to be torn into pieces. And their belongings scattered to the wind. Okay, yeah, well, God didn't need his help like that, but then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are promoted, which catches us up to chapter 4, which we will start 2 weeks from tonight, because next week is singing night. So, hope you can remember all that information. See, I did it. Monica didn't think I could do it. Get through 3 chapters in one night. So, well, yeah, I had to show you my cool little graphic there with the mirror.